this kind of music the kind of belief that you could make your own and actually not change the world, but just change the moment. You know, sometimes just change one little moment from one situation to another by inspiration of a song or a couple of words or just having fun or playing. And moment by moment, the world seems to change on its own.
What do you think our souls owe to ancient myths?
Well, the ancient myths were designed to put the minds, the mental system, into accord with this body system, with this inheritance.
A harmony?
Of the body, to harmonize. The mind can ramble off in strange ways and want things that the body does not want. And the myths and rites were a means to put the mind in accord with the body and the way of life in accord with the way that nature dictates.
We are the original inhabitants of this land called Australia by the white men. We have been here since the beginning of time, since the dream time, when everything we know was created. My people know how to sing each and every place of this sacred country, while we contemplate Ji, the sun god. Each song is a living map which describes a specific path, the course of a river, a mountain or forest. If you brought together all these songs which are passed down from generation to generation, and which come from dreams, we would compose the map of Australia.
Stories are sort of, to me, like messages in a bottle from shores someone else has visited first.
Yes, and you're visiting those shores now.
And these myths tell me how others have made the passage and how I can make the passage.
And also what the beauties are of the way.
The preservation of language, the story in its original form, that is the story that will resonate. We call ourselves Dene. That means living. We have our story.
These old stories live in us.
They do indeed. And the stages of a human development are the same today as they were in the ancient times. And the problem of a child brought up in a world of discipline, of obedience, and of his dependency on others has to be transcended when one comes to maturity, so that you are living now not in dependency, but with self-responsible authority. And the problem of the transition from childhood to maturity, and then from maturity and full capacity to losing those powers and acquiescing in the natural course of, you might say, the autumn time of life and the passage away. Myths are there to help us go with it, accept
their
nature's
history
way
and
our
culture is very important. It's a sacred thing. So it's very important that I go and tell my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids to keep it.
You know, I come from a working class family. My mother and father weren't well educated. I was second generation, I guess, Italian American. There was no tradition of reading in the house, no books. Of course, I read in school, et cetera, books in school and that sort of thing. But it was more of a visual tradition, and more I was taken to movie theaters a lot. Also, being a sickly child with very severe asthma, I couldn't play sports. So again, the movie theater and the church and the movie theater. And so, along with the films, there was also the advent of television, 1948, 49, and the heyday of really some of the best programming in American television, in the history of American television up to this point, with the 50s, 1950s. And so I saw a lot of television shows, but also films on television. Being working class family too, they didn't have enough money to go to the theater, so theater wasn't an option. Live stage shows. So it was mainly visual literacy. What was happening at that time to me. I did not understand that was happening. What it made me realize was that there was an intelligence, another kind of intelligence, that was trying to tell a story through where the director, the writer, and the cinematographer, where they were focusing your eyes. You know, whether it was the camera may be on an extremely low angle, looking up at you. The use of the lens, the size of the lens. I began to understand certain lenses interpreted the story differently. A longer lens crushed everything together and made it flat. A wider lens stretched everything and sometimes distorted it, especially if camera movement. I learned looking at certain pictures, particularly Wells's films, and William Wyler too, a wide-angle lens. Wyler used his wide-angle lens in a very strong, steady image. But Wells used that wide-angle lens, 18 millimeter, it turns out, very often, to move along the walls, and you really I felt as if the camera was flying, as if the story was flying by, you know. I didn't know why until I kept seeing the films again and again, and as I began to know a little more about what filmmaking was like and what cameras did, and that's, I still didn't know who made the pictures, you know, but I was beginning to understand that there are certain tools you use, and those tools become part of a vocabulary that's just as valid as that vocabulary that is used in literature.
What they say, the power of the stories too. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
A video too. Look at that.
I want to video you, but I don't. That's what that thing is about.
See, that's what you need this for.
That's exactly what I need it.
Yeah.
But that's what I want to talk about, the stories, because I think that the stories, like you're saying, like the person who tells the story.
Well, they run the show. You get what I'm saying? They run the show. But this in history as well. I'm sure within what your interest is, it's probably people who have totally ignored some of those things. And it may have been there, but they didn't place an importance on that part. You get what I'm saying? So they just totally ignored, or they, you know, sometimes it's conspiracy where they just change the stuff. Like I watch stuff. You would think Africa doesn't exist. You get what I'm saying? You would think black people never were in the history of any scientific or, you know, just because of how the story's being told.
Right.
You know, or I was watching something and I was like, dang, man. I was watching not Cosmos, it was something on like one of those channels, and I was just like, but it's whoever's telling the story. We can even hear stories from people who were terrible people, like horrible humans. But if the story was painted as them being the hero over the past 500, 200, 2,000, 5,000, whatever years, you get what I'm saying? And you just like, oh, that is a great person. It may have been, the story won, you know, because it controls the memory of something, you know, until somebody else jumps out and takes the time to refute it in some way.
But when you tell stories and you tell them, like you're actually telling the story, as opposed to writing it down, do you feel that when you're reading from a story that you've written down, or you're just oratory the story, do you feel that there's a change to it? Do you feel like you're remembering more bits maybe when you're speaking it, or do you feel like you're remembering more bits when you're pulling it out of something you're like,
I think that's a personal thing. So I think that's a personal thing based on the person. Like, I used to be in music, in hip hop, you know, so we were rapping. It was always a person who could freestyle. So a freestyle person could come off the top of their head. And it's just the same thing with storytelling. Some storytellers, like my dad, he's a good storyteller. He writes too, actually, but he don't write them as much. You know, he's more of oratory.
Right.
And then it gets transcribed or whatever. So, but I'm more of a writer. Like I like to write, so I think that that's like a personal thing. But in telling a story to an audience, yeah, it switches because you got somebody right in front of you, right? So it's the difference of reading, like reading a written story and telling the story to an audience. It got to be a difference because you got to keep an audience's attention.
So you're connecting when you're speaking with the audience. You're connecting to what they're connecting to you with.
Yeah.
So you might be remembering something that's more relevant to their connection than your own connection.
You get immediate response from the audience. So if I get a response from the audience, you know, I say something wrong, and the audience turns like cold on me.
Then you know, like,
I can either be an asshole and stay right there, you know, you get what I'm saying? Like some comedians do that, and that's their comedy. It's like being in that spot, it's uncomfortable for everybody. Or I can notice, okay, I'm going the wrong way and switch paths or try to win the audience back. So, you know, it's all kinds of things there, you know.
So when you're writing it, you're your own audience.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about the audience as well, though. I'm thinking about who I'm speaking to, you know.
So when you're writing it, who are you speaking to? When you're actually like writing it, who are you?
If I'm writing a story just to be writing a story, the audience, and I don't have an audience. I'm speaking to. I'm not necessarily speaking to myself, but I'm speaking to somebody who gets me in a certain way, you know. And I have a certain style, you know. So you find style with. You're a writer, you know this. Like over time, you know, like you might copy somebody, whoever your favorite writer is. You know, you copy them for a while, some time frame. Like I like Philip Roth. You know what I'm saying? I like his writing. I like Walter Mosley. I like his writing. So I might copy their style for a little bit.
Speak in their voice per se.
Yeah. But then over time, you find your own voice. You know, find your own style. Kind of like I got a more casual style. Even when I'm written something, it's like real casual. But I think about the audience because I don't think it's right if you don't think about the audience, especially if you read the story, you're telling the story to an audience, and you just decide not to think about that audience, to keep that audience's attention, you know, because you have to keep the audience's attention. Now, how you keep that is like movement. Stories need movement. They need something to be moving, and then they need a change. They need a change in the person over time, you know. So something got to change.
Like a development of
something
character.
got to develop. They gotta, you know, there got to be some movement and some kind of things happening.
So you don't have a specific person like. Is it like a broad audience when you're telling a story? Are you telling it to a like whether you're writing it or you're speaking? You're telling it just to one person,
one friend. Yeah. So I'm talking to one friend. Like I might be talking. I'm not talking to like a replacement of me. You got your food.
Oh, thank you.
Should I give you a number? I'm pretty sure that's yours.
There was a 48.
Yeah.
I don't know where. Maybe.
It was sitting over there.
I thought about this.
Great minds, huh?
Last maybe 50 years or so, that people have let TVs and radios do their singing for them. You know, we've been sitting around as human beings for a couple of 100 million years or whatever. I don't know how long we've been here, but we've been sitting around campfires singing songs, and before that, just regular fires, and singing these kind of songs, and you know, making up stories and passing on who we are from one generation to the next. It's nice to see that it's continuing, and it's nice to see that it's growing, and it's nice to see that it doesn't belong to any particular group of people or any one person, but sort of just belongs to everybody.